Hello?
To redirect to competing with China. Yeah. Does the
Shingles doesn't care. Empty measure.
are respected as well. Covered a lot of ground here, Senator. Thank you for joining me this morning, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. Always good to have you on the show. And that does it for me. Thank you for watching. Catch me here next Saturday and Sunday morning from 8 to 10. The Sunday show with my friend Jonathan Capehart starts right now. He's got an interview with Dr. Anthony Fauci. Ow. Whoa! Now open in Monroe on Monroe Way between Starbucks and Southwest Grill. Oh.
Bad sleep, one night on the road, and we already need a chiropractor.
You know, RV sleep doesn't have to be bad sleep. With Denver Mattresses RV Life.
Welcome to all of you in the United States and around the world. I'm Fareed Zakaria, coming to you live from New York. Today on the show, the Middle East is on fire yet again. As the UN warns the conflict will turn into full-scale war. What's behind this eruption? And what is going to put the conflagration out? I will talk to Martin Matek and Rashid Khalid. And Amal Clooney is on a quest to bring ISIS to justice for genocide. But she says the US government is not interested enough.
They deserve better than the response that they're getting.
I'll have an exclusive interview with Clooney and the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Nadia Murad. But first, here's my take. The Republican Party's decision, in effect, to excommunicate Liz Cheney is a watershed event. It marks the final transformation of the party from an ideologically driven enterprise to one that is tribal, marked less by ideas and more by group loyalty. Let's compare the voting records of Liz Cheney to the woman who replaced her as chair of the House Republican Conference, Elise Stefanik. The American Conservative Union gives Cheney a lifetime score of 78 out of 100 for her consistent conservatism. Stefanik gets a 44, which is one of the lowest scores for a House Republican these days. Cheney reliably voted for Trump's policies, while Stefanik was one of only 12 House Republicans to vote against the former president's signature legislation, the 2017 tax cut. But Stefanik has pledged fealty to Trump and his big lie about fraud in the 2020 election, while Cheney will not. And Republicans these days care more about tribal loyalty than conservative principles. This is a big shift. During the 20th century, the party evolved from a country club for wealthy elites, itself a kind of tribe, into a party animated by ideas. The struggle began in the 1950s. As National Review publisher William Russell once noted, modern American conservatism largely organized itself during and in explicit opposition to the Eisenhower administration. Barry Goldwater railed against his own party for daring to compromise with New Deal liberals. He thundered on the Senate floor in 1960. We have said for nearly 30 years that the welfare state, centralized government, and federal control are wrong. But in spite of that, say a little of it is all right. We are against federal aid to schools, but we have suggested a little of it. We are against federal aid to depressed areas, but we have offered a plan for a little of it. We recognize that to increase the minimum wage would be inflationary and would result in unemployment, but we suggest a little increase. Goldwater created the staunchly conservative base that would take over the party. But his free market ideology was so extreme that it proved too toxic to implement. Conservatives were forever promising the repeal of the New Deal and then the Great Society, but never actually delivering. This became the Republican dynamic. Fire up the base with visions of rollback, and then, once in power, quietly accommodate to the reality that most Americans actually wanted the welfare state. It created what E.J. Dionne calls the politics of betrayal, a narrative in which conservative ideas get sold out because of Republican cowardice. Enter Newt Gingrich, who found a way to keep conservatives charged up by focusing less on ideas and more on attitudes. Gingrich destroyed then Republican Minority Leader Robert Michael, an old-fashioned politician often called Mr. Nice Guy. He led the attack on George H.W. Bush for striking a deal with Democrats and raising taxes, which ensured that Bush lost his bid for re-election. He ousted Democratic Speaker Jim Wright on flimsy accusations, masterfully using innuendo, exaggeration, and slander. He tutored a generation of Republicans to remake their rhetoric, coaching them to use words like sick, traitors, corrupt, and selfish when describing Democrats. The Republican Party became the Fight Club Party. Over time, Republicans' dedication to their core ideas began to wear thin. It was difficult to claim fealty to fiscal conservatism when the party had consistently been instrumental in creating massive deficits. Nixon and Reagan in various ways actually expanded the welfare state. The elder Bush was a lifelong moderate, while the younger spoke of a compassionate conservatism that would use the federal government to solve social and economic problems. And the Iraq War discredited the ideological basis of Republican internationalism. So Donald Trump picked up where Newt Gingrich had left off. He again energized the Republican Party around attitudes, mostly resentments, aimed at liberal elites and foreigners, Chinese, Mexicans, and Muslims, whom he painted basically as foreigners. Trump was socially conservative, and yet economically he violated free market principles all the time, embracing tariffs, assailing big companies, and providing generous subsidies to his favorite constituents, such as farmers. But he understood the increasingly ethnic base of the party, and his rhetoric was pitch perfect in exploiting the insecurities of the white working class. Liz Cheney says she will fight to rebuild a Republican Party based on conservative principles. But that battle was lost years ago. The Republican Party today is not a movement dedicated to ideas, but a tribe devoted to self-preservation, defined by anger and emotions, and organized around a clannish loyalty to its leader. Go to cnn.com/Fareed for a link to my Washington Post column, and for more, tune into my new special, A Radical Rebellion, The Transformation of the GOP, tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. And let's get started. The UN Security Council is convening this hour to discuss the increasingly dire conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. Hamas fired more than 120 rockets overnight, according to the Israeli Air Force, and the
Government, but clearly the effort to form a different government is in disarray because of these actions. So you could say, if you're cynical, that the timing of this is perfect for him as My district voted for President Obama by double digits, and it voted for President Trump and myself by double digits. President Trump is the leader that they look to. I support President Trump. Republican voters are unified in their support and their desire to work with President Trump. We're unified in working with President Trump. My job representing our Republican members, the vast majority of you look forward to working with President Trump.
That kind of cult-like loyalty to Donald Trump is why Republicans chose Congresswoman Elise Stefanik as the new chair of the House Republican Caucus. She replaces Liz Cheney, who is way more conservative than Stefanik, but who was purged because she would not stop telling the truth about Trump's lies about the 2020 election. As for Trump, he's still spreading the big lie in a tweet-like statement this weekend, lashing out at his former Vice President Mike Pence, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, for not overturning the election. Joining me now, Sophia Nelson, author of E Pluribus One, and one of the more than 100 Republican signatories to a call for American renewal, which threatens to form a third party. And Tom Nichols, opinion columnist for USA Today. Welcome back, both of you, to the Sunday show. Tom, you haven't been here for a while, so I'm going to start with you. Please explain how it is that a woman like Liz Cheney, who voted with Donald Trump 92.9% of the time, is not loyal enough to hold on to her Republican Party leadership and is replaced by someone who, if my memory serves, is at about 77% voting with Donald Trump.
Because the Republican Party doesn't care about policy. The Republican Party lives in fear of its primary voters and of the most extreme cult-like wing of its own voters. And what those other Republicans in Congress have said is we need someone who shields us from President Trump's devoted followers, and Elise Stefanik will say anything in order to keep that job. And Liz Cheney keeps telling the truth, which makes everybody uncomfortable, which makes them embarrassed, and it makes them cognizant of what they've done, which they don't want to remember and they don't want to think about. So it makes, from the point of view of protecting people who want to stay in Congress, for people who like living in the Emerald City, it makes perfect sense. As a matter of Republican politics or of conservative policy of any kind, it makes no sense.
Sophia, speaking to Tom's point about living in fear of Donald Trump, have a listen to this, what Congresswoman Cheney told Jake Tapper.
You have more members who believe in substance and policy and ideals than are willing to say so. And in some cases, I mean, if you look at the vote to impeach, for example, there were members who told me that they were afraid for their own security, afraid, in some instances for their lives. And that tells you something about where we are as a country.
And Sophia, so that fear isn't just fear of a tweet. That fear is much larger.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, look, January 6th was a moment that I think shook us all to the core. I mean, at least I hope it did. And what Liz Cheney is doing right now is really brave. It's very Margaret Chase Smith-like, Margaret Chase Smith being the only woman in the Senate in 1950, taking on Joe McCarthy. And Liz Cheney's really standing in that vein. But I think that, to your point, the question really is, what is going on with members of Congress that they have so little courage, that they don't understand that shrinking to this man, shrinking to the big lie, and going along with it does not protect the Republic. It does not honor the Constitution. And that is why they are there. They are not there to keep their jobs. They are not there to enrich themselves, engage in largesse, whatever it is that you want to call it. And I get the fear about your safety after January 6th. Every member of Congress should fear to some degree for their safety, right? Mm-hmm. Because we know that the Capitol can be breached. We know that it has been breached. And I think that's why this commission is so important, this bipartisan commission. And I think we're going to have to take a real hard look at where we are, like Liz says, in our basic civility in the public square, Jonathan. And that's really what's at issue. Our basic civility in the political arena has gone to the dogs, for lack of a better way to say it. It's just going to work that way.
Right. I was going to say, what civility, given, Marjorie Taylor Greene chasing AOC around the Capitol. Tom, about the disarray within the Republican Party, which I would think under normal circumstances would have Democrats like this, watching, like praying, basically even thinking that, we got this, but can Democrats actually, let me rephrase the question. Will this fit what's happening within the Republican Party? Will it help Democrats?
It should, but Democrats and, sure, Sophia and others have seen this from the other side. Republicans always count on Democrats to self-destruct. It's been kind of one of the secret weapons of the Republican Party is that they have a cooperative adversary over on the other side. So it should, but it probably won't. And I'm not confident at all about what happens in 2022 right now. Part of the problem, I think, is that Democrats have mistaken a general loathing of Donald Trump and people being appalled with the Republican Party for approval of Democratic policies that a lot of Americans probably, certainly not purple districts, aren't going to be very comfortable with. I think that the thing we learned in 2018 and 2020 is that as a Democrat, you can't go wrong focusing on Trump and the Republicans. This is one reason that I'm sort of glad that Trump keeps speaking up. It reminds everyone who this party answers to. That's, I think, the Democrats have said, let's forget about Trump, let's move on. No, that's what Republicans want to do because they don't want people to realize that they are still, being made to dance, like a circus act in front of this guy. So, I actually think that the more Trump speaks up, the better. And if Democrats can just keep that focus on reminding people that they are the party that is fighting an authoritarian takeover of the United States government, then I think they'll do better. But when it comes into the infighting about, how many dollars here and which policy there, and then I think people sort of tune that out and the Republicans start regaining that natural advantage they have in the electoral college.
Sophia, go ahead, Sophia. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I would just add in the 2022 midterms, it's all about who shows up at the polls. And that's why the Voting Rights Act, the Renewal John Lewis Act is so critical that the Democrats hold the line on this, because if they don't, Kevin McCarthy is the next Speaker of the House. You heard it here. It's gonna happen because they're selling some really ugly stuff, socialism, cancel culture. It's a culture war, right? And they know that if they get the voters they want to show up, they win it.
Sophia, you are so good that you totally anticipated the question I was going to ask, which was going to be about 2022. So with that, we'll leave it there. Sophia Nelson and Tom Nichols, thank you both very much for coming back to the Sunday show. Coming up, can the Democrats use the Republican mayhem to their advantage? I'm going to ask that question to Democratic House Conference Chair Hakeem Jeffries next.
I like Hakeem Jeffries.
The Palestinian issue was not that important. The Arabs really
Pick up that.